the May 10th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting to order at 6:01 p.m. Ms. Pinyard, will you please call the roll?
Chair Ron Heberlein.
Here.
Olive Gallagher. Here. Nicole Hendricks.
Here.
Andrew Carr.
Here.
Cameron Mesbah.
Here.
Catherine Neal.
Here.
Vice Chair Willard. Thank you.
All right, now it is time for us to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Moving on to citizens' input. This is the time that citizens have the opportunity to address the Planning Commission meeting regarding any item that is not already scheduled for a formal public hearing tonight. Therefore, if any member of the audience, either here in City Hall or via Zoom, would like to speak about any work session item or any other matter of concern, please raise your hand or send a message to the recorder using the Zoom chat function so that we may hear from you now.
I have no hands raised on Zoom.
All right. Okay, moving on to administrative matters. We have the consideration of the April 12th, 2023 Planning Commission minutes. And the April 12th, 2023 Planning Commission minutes being considered were previously distributed. Are there any corrections to the minutes? All right. Hearing none, the minutes are approved as distributed. All right, public hearing. It's been a while since we've done one of these. Legislative hearing procedure. Matters before the Planning Commission involve legislative public hearings. These are somewhat different than the quasi-judicial hearings conducted by the city's Development Review Board. The Planning Commission would like to hear from anyone who has testimony to offer that is relevant to the issues before the Planning Commission. If you wish to testify tonight, you need to complete a testimony card. For those who are here in person, please complete a testimony card located at the side of the room and hand it to the recorder. For members of the public participating remotely with the Zoom meeting platform, digital testimony cards are already filed with the recorder, but we ask that you please indicate now or after the presentation a desire to testify by sending a message to the recorder at City Hall using the Zoom chat function. For those people joining the meeting by phone only, you will be unmuted after the staff presentation and asked one at a time if you wish to testify. If you've not previously submitted a digital testimony card, please request one now using the Zoom chat function. Please note that testimony may also be submitted by email during the hearing by emailing the following email address: planning@ci.wilsonville.or.us. Then please confirm with the recorder through the Zoom chat option that you emailed your comments. Your email will then be read into the record. Remain in the meeting until the comments are received and read aloud. Written comment or testimony received after the public hearing has closed cannot be considered. Because your testimony gives you legal standing in the matter for which you are testifying, it is important that you provide your full name and address at the beginning of your comments, or if you prefer not to state your address aloud in the public forum, state that your address is as provided on the testimony card you submitted and make your statement. When your name is called to testify, if you are present in council chambers, please come forward to the podium and speak clearly into the microphone for the record. If you are participating in the meeting remotely using the Zoom phone or web platform, please wait to be unmuted by the recorder before stating your name and comments for the record. Awesome. There's page 5. When you testify, please address your comments to the findings, criteria outlined in the staff report, and applicable regulations that city staff cite at the start of the meeting. Some of the issues that come before the Planning Commission are fairly complicated. For that reason, we especially appreciate any specific recommendations or suggestions that you may have. We will ask you to avoid redundant testimony. If you agree with testimony that has already been given, just tell us that. If we have a large number of people interested in testifying, we may limit the time allotted to each member of the public to 3 minutes. At the end of your testimony, members of the commission may have questions for you. Thank you for taking the time to participate in the hearing tonight and help us deal with these issues. All right, now we can move on. Ms. Lewis to present this transit master plan.
Great. Hello, everyone. I am Kelsey Lewis. I'm the Grants and Programs Manager at SMART. And we're back here again today to discuss the Transit Master Plan and changes that have been made since last month.
Sorry, I realized I didn't do everything I was supposed to, so I should do that now. Stand by. Get the public hearing number. I got it. Sorry. Okay. All right. So we have a resolution to the City of Wilsonville Planning Commission recommending the Wilsonville City Council adopt a 2023 Transit Master Plan for the City of Wilsonville South Metro Area Regional Transit, resolution number LP 23-0001. And I declare the public hearing open at 6:08 p.m. Now, please present the staff report. Thank you.
Great. As I was saying, I'm Kelsey Lewis with SMART. We saw you last month to discuss the draft master plan. We have made some changes to it since then. I have our 2 consultants on the phone, or rather on Zoom, and I see them now. So we have just a few slides for you. We want to first go over the survey results that happened since the draft master plan has been out, and then just briefly go through the changes that we've made to the master plan since we heard from you last month, and also public comments. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Michelle to start that presentation. Michelle, you are muted.
Okay, how about?
That's better.
Okay, let me make sure that I'm actually sharing the right side of my screen with you here. You see a PowerPoint slide?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you for having us back, and we appreciated the feedback and the questions that you had for us at our last presentation, and did a little bit more work on the plan in response to that feedback, and also in response to what we heard through public consultation. I'm joined by Brenda Martin. She's with Enviro Issues, and she and her colleague Sarah managed the public engagement at this phase, as well as last fall when we did a more general public engagement. So if there are questions about public engagement, I'll let her answer those. And of course, there are many questions that Kelsey is the best person to answer as well. So here's where we are in our process. We were with you a month ago when we were doing community engagement, and now we've closed the community engagement, made some changes to the plan, and we're in this pre-adoption process, I suppose. So public input on the plan, we had 39 online submissions of comments from people. We had a survey, but people could also give free-form comments. Most of the commenters said that they use SMART at least once a week, so they're mostly transit riders. The top 3 priorities that they chose, we asked them to choose priorities again, were higher frequencies, better regional connections, and improved weekend service. And that's consistent with the emphasis of the draft plan. So that's generally what we heard last time. It's what we heard again, and it's reflected in the plan. 22 people said when they were asked that they agreed that the draft plan was heading in the right direction. 11 people said they were neutral, and 2 people said that they disagreed. Some of the changes that we made a lot of tiny changes that are not worth noting, but we made some bigger changes in response to what we heard here from you, as well as in response to public feedback. So one thing is that we added some financial information to the executive summary. It was on pages 94 and 95 of the document, but it was very important, and so it was worth mentioning in the executive summary. We also estimated the total operating costs if all of the service increases were implemented. So that's the sort of 2028 ambitious aspirational scenario. We were using 2022 unit operating costs, meaning the cost of putting a bus out on the road per hour from 2022. So we didn't do a financial forecasting exercise where we try to guess how your operating costs will change between now and 2028, but we did simply apply your current unit operating cost to the quantity of service being recommended for 2028 and added that information to the plan. We also combined the existing conditions report with the plan. The existing conditions report was published last summer. It documents recent history and also not so recent history. Some of the information goes back 10 years. But it was, not that easy to reference because it wasn't part of the same document. So we've combined them now into one document. People can get the backwards look and the forwards look in the same document. And that also helps people see information about past ridership and past costs per ride, both for demand response and fixed route. And related to that, we just had to do a little bit more math using some national transit database data, but we have one additional table and chart that we'll add to the document as well before it goes before City Council, and that is to go with this chart. So this is a graph showing cost per passenger trip on demand response service, so dial-a-ride, from 2011 through 2020. And we didn't have a version of this graph for fixed routes, so we've created a version for the fixed routes. This is for all the fixed routes combined, cost per passenger trip, 2011 through 2020. So this is the one thing that we know we should add to the document that's not yet in the document that's in the packet. And that is the total of my presentation. I have many other slides with maps and other pieces of reference information. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to pull them up. But I'm also happy to stop and let the public hearing proceed.
Do the commissioners have any questions for staff or consultants regarding the report?
I just appreciate the time you took to follow up and kind of implement some of the things that we suggested last time. And I did just want to clarify, so this was submitted today, the Chariots letter. And so can you I just read it briefly. So are they kind of just noting that like there's going to be a cost on their end as well if we for what we're suggesting, or maybe could you clarify? Sorry.
Interpret a little bit?
Yeah, thank you.
So to catch everyone up, we received a response, an agency response from Chariots, which is the provider to our south that provides Salem service. We share the current 1X route with them from Wilsonville to Salem. And they submitted a letter to us today. So I believe you all have a paper copy of that. I hope I can summarize their response. They're sort of reiterating, we're very happy that we'd have this partnership with you with the 1X route to Salem. Also excited to hear that you're interested in partnering with us on the Woodburn route. And then there was a question in there about service cost. I think they're just asking for a clarification. Does this include our service? Or how much of this is our service? Is it all your service? So we are working on a response to that just to clarify and give it back to them later this week.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah.
That's it for me.
On your chart, there was a spike in cost per rider in 2020. What was the reason for those?
That would for sure be the pandemic.
Okay.
So a huge drop in ridership, which means the cost of everything per unit goes up, and then extra cleaning, all of those extras, things that we weren't previously doing, just makes the cost really high.
And I know we didn't extend the dollars out, but am I correct when I read this that the operating cost would double with this plan put in place?
Michelle, do you want to talk about that? We go ahead, Michelle.
When you said we didn't extend the dollars out,
You only have them through 2026, 2027. But it looks like the cost of the new programs seems to be around $8 million, which the cost of the
maybe you
existing.
can tell me.
I think
It would be helpful for me if I knew what page you were looking at, and then I can look. At the same page.
85,
I believe you're looking at the forecast that was included in the master plan. So Michelle, that's the forecast that came straight out of our budget document.
it's like 80, 85, 86, 87, 88, and 89.
Yeah, so page 85 is just an image of the city of Wilsonville adopted
Budget, right.
And then in 86, 87, so the big bottom kind of summary number is on page 89,
Right.
all recommended service increases. And that comes to $8 million. And the way that I calculated that was to take the increase in revenue hours included in those service increases, which is just hours of vehicles and drivers on the road in service, and multiply it by your 2022 fully loaded operating costs per revenue hour. So what we didn't do, because it would be a financial planning exercise that is beyond the scope of this project, is try to forecast how much your operating costs will change between per hour of bus and driver time between 2022 and 2028. But what we did do is take the quantity of service represented in this 2028 network and dial-a-ride and say, if your costs of doing business stayed the same, how much would this cost to provide?
So is
And that
that
does not
an
include the-
extrapolation of the, because I'm looking at 2026, 2027, it's 7.7 million basically to not buy buses, apparently, because that's in the, well, that's the building capital fund. I'm just trying to figure out is the additional cost of these additional services really $8 million?
Yeah, you're trying to figure out like the degree of change, right?
Correct,
Percentage.
yes.
Okay. Actually, there's probably a better table to look at that. And let me just find it. Look at page 45.
Okay.
Okay, so the bottom line of this table is describing service.
Yes.
But it is summing quantity of service per route. And then the bottom line is comparing the 2028 quantity of service to the 2021 quantity of service. And that's where you get some ratios. So in terms of hours on the road, it would be 189% more. And in terms of miles on the road, 266. Again, this does not include vehicles. You would need more vehicles. You can actually see the vehicles in the last column, and that's just your peak vehicle requirement. But this gives you ratios.
Okay, so it would be, well, we can't do, okay.
And you know what? I'm realizing looking at this that ratio is the wrong word. Well, how would an ordinary person understand this? Is 189%?
Percent increase.
Is that yeah, it's a percent increase. I think ratio is the right way to say it, right?
Right.
Okay.
So the revenue hours are
189.
189% greater than what they were in 2021.
Exactly. So almost triple is a way to say it. So I'll change that word ratio so that it's clearer.
So then I can expect an offset or an equal increase in cost, right? Revenue hours and cost per hour, it'll wash. Okay,
They track pretty closely.
okay. That helps, thank you. I think that's all I got. Yep.
Commissioner Gallagher, anything from you? So the Commissioner Carr did a good job asking the same questions I had on the finances that we've been going back and forth on for the last day. I think the other question that I had was around the wording of the selection of the size of vehicles for the master plan going forward. And I was trying to find it exactly in the document. But it talked about the desire to buy the biggest bus possible. And I want to find where that is, just so that I make sure that I say it appropriately.
I think I'll help you find the page. Well, maybe I can find the page first, but it's the biggest bus you need to handle whatever crowd you're expecting on that route during the day. Not possible, not the biggest bus possible.
Sure. And so that's then looking at peak forecasted ridership. Am I correct in saying that? So that would be picking the bus that is sized to support peak ridership and not necessarily the average ridership, because those two can be drastically different.
Correct.
I guess the concern I have, or the question I have is when we get to that point, what total life cycle cost, what environmental analysis is going to be done to understand the impact of upsizing a bus to support 2 hours of peak demand and then having buses of that size operating 85% empty all the rest of the time. It was pretty close to that, if I remember the chart on ridership correctly. Yeah.
Michelle, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. Empty seats on a bus are very visible, so they tend to get a lot of attention. But if you try to right size your bus to the number of people you're expecting on the bus, at different times of the day, what you end up doing is a lot more deadhead of driving the bus back and forth to your depot. Now, you have a pretty conveniently located depot, so you don't have terrible deadhead. But deadhead does have an environmental cost, as you say. It also has a staff time cost because your staff has to drive the bus to and from the depot. And it also, it kind of means that you have to be overlapping more of your staff and more of your vehicles, because while a bus is coming back to the depot because it's too big for the next time period, the other smaller bus has to be heading out. So you're kind of doubling up at different times of day. So trying to right size so that you have not too many empty seats and you're running the smallest bus you can ends up costing more in deadhead miles, deadhead hours, and staff time. This is why the efficient thing to do most of the time, not in every case, is figure out how crowded your bus is going to be when it's at its most crowded. Is that a bearable level of crowding? And maybe it is. Maybe it just means people stand for 10 or 20 minutes, and that's not the end of the world. But if it's not bearable, assign the vehicle to the block, which is the sort of the day's work for the vehicle. Assign the vehicle that you need for that really crowded trip, which is probably 2:30 p.m. when the middle school gets out. and then pull it out in the morning and run empty seats. It's true. But then you have a much simpler schedule. You aren't kind of doubling up miles to and from the depot. It reduces the complexity of your staff schedules. And, so I think you're going to have a lot of different aspects of the vehicle to manage in your fleet. There's what type of fuel are you using? If you're using electric vehicles, when do they need to be charged and where? How long of routes can you put them on given that? What are the environmental impacts of all of those? And then also, what is the size of the vehicle? What is the age of the vehicle? How many wheelchair boardings are you expecting on the route? Because that will certainly influence how big of a vehicle you want. There are so many factors that your staff are going to be sort of trying to optimize for, and crowding is one of them. So I think it's important that they kind of respect the math that makes it efficient to run a large enough vehicle for your busiest trips of the day for more of the day than just on those busy trips. But that doesn't mean they're always going to be running the largest vehicle. And there's also a bunch of other things they're going to have to optimize for. So there really isn't a hard and fast rule here, but those are some of the considerations that go into the planning for what vehicle to put on what trip. And that's why you often see buses with empty seats, because they're empty right now, but in a couple hours they'll be full. And that's the more efficient and sometimes more environmentally responsible thing to do.
So is the expectation, Kelsey, that analysis is going to be performed so that we can, that when the time comes that we make those fleet decisions, that combined analysis is occurring and we're looking at what those trades might be? Because in my mind, it comes down to what are the key goals and then looking at what those impacts are. So if environmental impact is the number one goal, then you may make a different decision from a fleet and staffing perspective than if it's reducing staff cost. And I think I just want to make sure that we're having that appropriate analysis and conversation when the time comes that we make those decisions. Because it's not clear from the master plan that is part of the process.
Yeah, I agree that there are a lot of decision-making processes that are going on all the time. I mean, Michelle explained it in a very analytical way. That there are a lot of processes you'd be going through. Realistically, we're doing this every day, all the time. It might look really simple, but it might start with something like, there were a lot of people on this particular bus at this particular time. Let's watch that trend and see where it goes. So we're going to be watching for crowding. I think what I would say right now is that we typically, as you probably know, we have mostly smaller buses. That's how we've been operating thus far. We have some larger buses, but for the most part, they're what we call cutaways, the smaller vehicles. Currently, we're still coming out of the pandemic. We still have low ridership. So we're going to be watching that ridership, and we are actually. Our analyst on a regular basis will be going through the numbers, and she'll say, hey, we just got a boarding for this much at this time. Wow, that's a lot. And then she will pay attention to that. We'll keep looking at it. So crowding is one thing that we look at, but you're right. That's just one thing that we look at, and we're going to continue to look at many other factors. And one of those realistic factors that we didn't necessarily talk about here is some vehicles are a lot easier to get right now. Realistically speaking, we're going to get those ones because we need vehicles. So some of them might not follow the plan of getting larger buses right away. So yes, there are a lot of different factors we look at, and I think one of the ones that we consider as a factor that's very important to us is our environmental impact and our goal to get to alternative fueled vehicles by 2028. So that's going to be part of our process. You know, I did say we're going to get the vehicles we can get, but the caveat to that is, for example, if what we can get is a 40-foot diesel bus, we're not. We're going to wait because that is a higher priority for us I'm not going to say exactly what would happen if we were in that pickle. We're not there yet, but yes, there are a lot of factors when we are deciding which buses to purchase. And I think when we look at something like overcrowding, there are a number of factors we're going to look at to see if that's an appropriate level of crowding, or if that's comfortable for people, or if we have any difficulties. Certainly if we're having challenges with not enough lift services, for people with accessibility issues, that's going to raise pretty high, pretty fast. Yeah, I won't go on too much about that, but.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
The environmental impacts that we have been talking are all pretty isolated for the transit system. The whole purpose is to make the transit system more welcoming and easier to use so that people use transit instead of driving. So when we talk about environmental impact, we need to look at the larger context. If somehow through our sizing and scheduling, we end up discouraging people from using the transit system, and they end up using their cars more, the environmental impacts of that are tremendously larger than, 20% larger bus for a peak hour, or whatever the difference is. And you aren't in control of that. I mean, the whole purpose is to make the transit system so easy that people, for the most part, leave their cars behind and use the transit. And the more we start adding crowding, and maybe I'll catch the bus, maybe there's no room for it for me on this one, and I have to wait another 15 minutes in rain or whatever. All of those become impediments to people using the bus. So I think the complexity of that picture needs to be appreciated when we talk about well-optimized environmental impacts. It sounds easy, it's not, because of all the moving pieces, and people have a choice to make.
Commissioner Carr?
How do we capture ridership data?
Good question. In a number of ways. So we have, I'm going to forget all of the acronyms. I will try not to use the acronyms. We have counters on the buses. We also have our drivers doing a paper tally. It's kind of a backup system to that counter that's actually on the bus. So that keeps track of the ridership. Then, as I mentioned, we have an analyst who does a great job of crunching all of those numbers and putting them together, and then we put it into a system called the National Transit Database, or NTD, and that's where kind of we aggregate all of the information and put it into a federal system that, they ask for specific things. And in addition to ridership, there are many other factors that they ask about, but ridership is one of those.
And then our data analyst basically extracts information back out of that and does like big data analysis? Is that, or is it more the counter and the papers that she's analyzing?
Both, all of it, really.
Okay.
All right. So I guess now I get to call for public testimony. All members of the public on the call will be unmuted if they wish to testify. If you wish to testify, please raise your hand or send a message to the recorder using the Zoom chat function so that we may hear from you. If you emailed comment, please state that for the record, and staff will read those comments into the record. And for anybody that does want to testify, they'll need to fill out a testimony card, either physically or via email. Do we have anybody that's indicated they want to testify?
Not at this time.
And I'm not seeing any people in the audience looking to testify either. So Unless there is a desire to continue the public hearing to a future specified date, I think we are okay with closing the public hearing. All right, I'll call the public hearing closed at 6:36 p.m. Any discussion to be had?
I like it. I think it's a good plan. I think there's a lot of moving parts, so to speak, that will have to be worked out over the years, but I think overall, it's a pretty good and workable plan, so.
I think the only question I have is from a logistics perspective of actually approving the master plan. I know there was the additional chart that needed to be added. We need to know where that's going to go in the plan so that we can include that as a addition to the plan.
I don't think you need to note the exact page. You can just note that that's going to be added, and I think there was a change also about the word ratio. So you can just say with the following amendments to include the chart provided by the consultant and probably reference the specific page about the ratio.
And what was the chart?
That was the fixed service ridership cost chart.
And the page number for that word ratio is page 45.
We changing it from ratio to something specific or just dealer's choice? Okay. Ratio to percentage. So then we would be looking at a motion to approve resolution LP 23-0001 with the amendment, the following amendments, adding the additional fixed service ridership chart, and on page 45, changing ratio to percentage.
Change.
Percent change?
Yeah, or percent change.
Percent change.
Okay, I think I have a motion when we're ready.
Go for it.
All right. I move to adopt resolution LP 23-0001 with the following amendments to include the fixed service ridership cost chart and the change on page 45 from the word ratio to percent change, as we discussed, and then recommending approval of the transit master plan for city council.
Second.
All right. So then we can discuss if any other discussion is required.
I just think the team did a great job, and I'm excited to see how we kind of, implement over time. And I think, just being dynamic and adaptive will be kind of also the name of the game a little bit. That's how it goes. So thank you.
Any other comments or positions to be stated?
2 thumbs up.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve resolution LP, my screen go blank, 23-0001 with the amendments to add the fixed service ridership chart and on page 45, change ratio to percent change. Now we need to call for a vote. And
Do you want a roll call vote? Is that what you're asking for, Chair?
sure, let's do that. That's more fun.
Okay.
Drama filled.
All right. All right. Chair Heberlein.
Yay.
Cameron Methbaugh.
Yay.
Olive Gallagher. Yay. Andrew Carr.
Yes.
Nicole Hendricks.
Yes.
Catherine Neal.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear Catherine Neal.
Yes. Sorry.
Thank Thank you. Motion passes unanimously.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, staff, consultants, very much. Appreciate all the effort you guys put into this. Great job.
Thank you very much.
All right. Moving on to our work session item for the day, Frog Pond East and South implementation. More fun with Mr. Polly.
Let me move over to the laptop.
New TV show.
Thank you. And Daniel Pauly, Planning Manager. And this, I was thinking about this. Here goes another episode of some terrible cereal or something. So
We could call it Mr. Polly's Neighborhood. That works. So let's go with that.
okay.
As long as that gets in the record, I'm good.
Give me a moment to get the right presentation up here. So overall tonight, we've done this a few times now, but we're taking bit by bit of these development code changes. And overall, just to explain to the commission is there's some of these larger amendments we're still working through, doing some testing, working with stakeholders that we'll be bringing back to you in the coming months. So in the meantime, we're bringing some of these, important pieces, but, but not, the tip top of the tree or pyramid or however you want to look at it. So give me a moment here. All right. So really, there's three segments of our episode tonight. The first one being defining urban form. So this urban form we talked about when we did the master plan. Is this the best term? It's the best term we came up with. So about defining really the built environment and differentiation of different areas by built environment. It is something that we don't readily refer to in the current development code, so we need some clarity for the new terms. And so adding definitions to urban form itself, but then some specifics to how it's used in the proposed code, urban form type and urban form type designation are the three. So here are the three terms. So urban form, the definition at this point talks about physical characteristics, and then really also gets to what is those key things that are defining that realm. So the bulk of the buildings, how they're placed, such as setbacks and separation, and also related site improvements such as driveways and things like that also have an impact, and sidewalks, pathways on the urban form. Urban form type really gets to those three different types that we have identified in the Frog Pond East and South Master Plan, with one being a more urban look and feel, meaning it has kind of bulkier buildings that are set closer to the street, some of which may not be as separated, still separation and light and air between them, but maybe not quite as much as some others, where type 3 being more setback from the street, it's kind of smaller bulk, and type 2 somewhere in between. And as most of this commission will recall, we talked a lot about that when we developed the master plan. Then the designation is really getting to how it's actually applied to a map for purpose of regulation. That then again then in turn is tied to the specific lot size standards and things like that that apply to a specific area. So I'll pause there. Happy to hear your thoughts and where we are on this, and any additional changes that you would suggest.
Commissioner Gallagher, any thoughts on this? Okay.
I have nothing, no changes to suggest.
No changes to
Yeah,
suggest.
thank you.
Oh, why not? So,
Need to, Ron.
yeah,
Challenging.
I might as well. So, urban
Sure,
form,
fine.
is that used in other municipalities? Is this something that we've come up with?
I mean, it's used in the field Yeah, it's not something that, oh, we didn't know what to call it.
Yeah.
I think the only like urban form that we've heard kind of pushback against its use, I mean, it's definitely used in the field, but we're not talking about urban, we're talking about suburban, right? So, I mean, that's probably the only pushback that we've heard about it. But I mean, it's an accurate term for like an urban designer or something to use.
Sure. Okay. That's all I got.
Urban form is a term of art. Suburban is an urban form.
Yeah. Are we ready to move on to the next one? Okay. The next segment, get into design standards for housing. Previously, we talked specifically about design standards for the Brisbane Main Street mixed-use area. So this is for everything else, the rest of the housing structures in Frog Pond East and South. And as we've talked about before, really, as we've developed these standards, we've looked at what we have elsewhere, what works, what doesn't, and massage those. I will also, so particularly to the Frog Pond West standards, which we plan on applying the residential neighborhood zoning, which is the same that exists for Frog Pond West. We've had a number of years and many permits to apply the Frog Pond West standards, and through that, we've always thought, well, we've been looking are there opportunities of things we want to improve when this is kind of opened again, because when we adopted Frog Pond West standards, we kind of took some experiences and our experience with the standards, the much more detailed standards in Vilbois and what worked and what didn't work there, what is maybe too much and, requires an outside architect to review. We don't necessarily always need that. But then looked at some different case studies and kind of best practices at the time to develop a series of standards for Frog Pond West. Since that time, we've gone through the middle housing project, as you're aware, and as part of that, where it was about middle housing, we also created, as part of that, design standards to apply to all residential structures throughout the city, including detached single-family homes, which didn't exist when we adopted Frog Pond West standards. So a big question when working on these design standards is, okay, what do we apply in this case? Or what's desirable to apply? Do we just keep applying the Frog Pond West standards, which are particularly specific to detached homes, since that's really what was, and certain middle housing, since that's really what was allowed in Frog Pond West? Or these wider standards, which the citywide standards that we developed as part of middle housing, we really thought, okay, we looked at Vilbois, Frog Pond West, and looked at a bunch of example structures, as you know, and looked a lot, particularly around articulation and what's kind of that minimum, what's effective and what's like the big ticket items to really differentiate and provide variety that's meaningful. We decided, kind of based on color and materials were really the focus. So with that all in mind, and plus we sat down with all the planners that have been approving all these building permits over the last many years, and really got their detailed feedback of what works well in Frog Pond West and what doesn't. So we've edited the language, and so I think it's best to understand, really put into two categories. What are the Frog Pond West standards that, these have meaning, we should carry these forward into Frog Pond West versus, these citywide standards that came through the Middle Housing Project are probably the better option. So the things that Frog Pond West to carry forward are main entrance standards. The thing I'd say about main entrance standards is a lot of the model code for middle housing already has these, but they don't exist for detached homes otherwise. And so that's been fairly, and kind of this, what we've heard from the commission, particularly for Frog Pond East and South, is continuing that kind of theme of focusing on the pedestrian realm and kind of a pedestrian focused design, which we've had at Frog Pond West as well as Villebois. So carrying forward those main entrance standards seemed something that would be prudent to do in this case. Garage standards, that's something that generally has been positively, again, getting to that pedestrian-friendly design that we've talked about and not getting the garages over dominating the look and feel of the neighborhood. There in Frog Pond West, there was, for those that were, I forget, were any of you actually on the commission that worked through that? Ron, were you here for Frog Pond West? I think you were still a resident at that point, an interested neighbor. You may not even remember. Chair Heberlein, so. Anyway, so they ended up, because you had these variety of lot sizes, of having this separate regulation for large lots where it was based on the garage wall width rather than garage door width, where generally the regulation was based on the garage door width, which is, I think, more typical across jurisdictions. So there has been some challenges and confusion around that garage wall width and how to apply it. And also the unclarity about that is sometimes developers, we've had a couple instances where developers couldn't get the right size garage door to meet that garage wall width, and that caused some issues. So simplifying that to the garage door width being not more than 50%. Seems like a reasonable approach, and also consistent with some of the standards that actually exist in some of the middle housing standards. So prohibited materials, you could go either way on that. I don't think any of those materials will be used, but it doesn't hurt to be consistent with that. Fences, there's some aspects of that where you have fences coming up to like Stafford Road and how it interrelates to those walls, that treatment along Stafford Road that we'll talk about more here in a minute. Those are still important concepts that we thought prudent to leave in. The design adjacent to schools and parks of not having essentially rears against schools and parks is something that, is a good design element that makes sense to carry forward, but also it addresses a specific ask in the master plan to make sure that houses have their eyes on the East Neighborhood Park specifically. And we'll also talk to the master plan about making sure eyes are on that 10-acre community park as well. So again, some language that was previously vetted that meets that intent of the East and South Master Plan using existing language. So wanted to continue to apply that. The citywide standards, the facade variety, or sometimes called in Villebois era of rules of adjacency. Again, there was a lot of thought put into that as part of the middle housing. This exists in Frog Pond West, but a little differently. Really think the most streamlined and effective one, our current understanding is what's the new citywide standard, so wanted to apply that here. The articulation, which is more generic and thought out, applies to all, really adaptable to different unit types, makes sense. Then any middle housing specific standards, including window coverage and driveway and parking area standards, would continue to apply from the citywide standards. So I'll pause there. Any questions or anything looking through what all those standards were? I mean, just note things that we're taking away is there was that whole design menu about materials for Frog Pond West that we're not recommending applies in East and South. So that's probably, I would say, the biggest ticket item that we're not carrying forward. I'm happy to talk any more about that or answer any questions about kind of the recommendation of this mix to apply to East and South. Or if there's other important standards you think need to apply in an area with such a variety of unit types. Or am I making any sense
I just
around
have
this at
some
all?
clerical stuff.
Go for it.
So on section 4.13, dot 14, you say the A1 on page, I don't know what page it is. There are no pages. Facade variety standards in section C.1 do not apply in the village zone or the Frog Pond West neighborhood in the residential neighborhood zone. Would it not be prudent to put a code reference for where that does not, what will apply? And then kind of the same in section 3 where you're talking about this, they do not apply in these areas, but you're not referencing where those areas would go for their relevant code.
Yeah, referencing where those applicable standards are.
I think that was the only one I was confused on. Otherwise, yeah, I'm fine. All the other corrections were as is.
I just appreciate that the team was able to kind of incorporate what we've kind of learned for the recommendation. So I think that's great, and I'm supportive of what's being kind of laid out, the direction so far.
Commissioner Gallagher, any questions or comments? One question, garage standards. The maximum driveway width of 18 feet, does that support a 3-car garage side by side, or is that 2 cars?
18, so a standard parking spot is 9 by 18, but what we've seen where it has applied, which there are homes in Frog Pond West, such as the Street of Dreams that do have it, essentially you have that 18-foot, because it's not just that, but it really reduces the span that pedestrian vehicle conflict zones. So they'll have the 18-foot driveway, but then it essentially slants out to that third.
That's why they did that.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's 18 foot at the street.
Yeah.
18 foot at the street, but then once you're on the site, it can go out to that third.
Yeah. Okay.
That's where your boat goes.
And this is coming from someone that has a very wide 3-car driveway that has, I don't know how wide my driveway is.
30
It's a lot more
feet.
than 18.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Good.
All right. So design addresses. I call it design addresses. That's a term that we use in the village zone to describe like any special treatments like around the piazza or along Villebois Drive where there's special design. So kind of carry that design address concept forward here. I talked previously how there was some specific language about homes fronting onto the East Neighborhood Park, that while we carried forward that language from West. The other 2 areas where the East and South Master Plan really talked about specific design elements were on what would you think the most visible roads, Stafford Road and Advance roads? What was discussed as part of the master planning includes pedestrian orientation of development, really caring for that theme of, these roads, when we build, will have good pedestrian bicycle infrastructure, and so making sure that homes are oriented to take advantage of that, but also carry forward kind of that design language with the brick wall and such that exist in Frog Pond West, because always the concept is, when it's built out, this is Frog Pond. There's not Frog Pond east, west, south, northwest, right? We're not naming every subdivision, and it's meant to kind of be a cohesive neighborhood like you'd see in Charbonneau or Villebois. So we have added some specific standards to address this, and I'll go through each of the two kind of addresses one by one. Stafford has a bit more to it, a bit more detailed in the master plan. One thing we heard from the Planning Commission in particular that was implemented into the master plan was structures having interests facing Stafford Road. So that is included. And then because you're facing it, so essentially the treatment along Beckman and Stafford and Frog Pond West is really thought of as kind of a rear yard treatment, because everywhere it's ever site. There's no homes planned in West where they actually front onto Stafford or Beckman. So how to kind of adapt that. So essentially having that low courtyard wall that's the same design essentially as the brick element in West, but having it shorter as kind of that courtyard, and also you're fairly set back from Stafford at that point too, so you have that barrier. The other element is where you do put a gate. The option is you can put a gate, which maybe if you have a detached home or townhouses facing Stafford, you may have individual gates like you see for some of the townhouses in Villebois and such. But if it's like multifamily, you probably won't have a gate. It'll just be open. So there's both those options. But where there is a gate, then you'd have kind of that same wrought iron design that's on the top of the fence. So again, that same design language that you see in Frog Pond West. The other element that the master plan talks about is you have this 4-story mixed-use buildings at Brisbane and Stafford, and how does the design transition from there? And because you're looking at kind of how it relates both to Frog Pond West as well as how it transitions from the Brisbane Main Street. So those allowance of higher or encouragement and allowance of higher development and a right adjacent to Brisbane, just north and south of Brisbane along Stafford, is put into the language as well to make sure to best we can to have a transition there. I do think that once it's built, there'll be you'll have this layer of street trees, landscaping trees, the courtyard wall, and so there'll be a lot in the built environment that kind of screens or breaks up that development. So maybe the height transition isn't that critical, but it is something that we want to encourage. So. And finally, Advance Road, a bit more straightforward. The main idea is having the building main entrances. These are houses that front Advance Road, really helping it look more similar to Willow Creek Drive and Frog Pond West rather than, looking like Beckman Road, east of or west of Stafford. And also but still, it's a balancing act here, right? You have that wall, and it's still kind of this entry point into the city, and kind of transitioning and relating to that treatment that's on Beckman and Stafford. So having an even lower kind of courtyard wall where you just have a bit of brick element at the bottom with the wrought iron see-through kind of courtyard to provide kind of that consistent feel along the frontage is something that'd be desired to just make it look cohesive on those main streets going through the area. So I will leave it at that and happy to take any comments and questions. Happy to go back to any of the other slides as well, of course.
So if we have frontage of buildings on Stafford and the parking is in the back, how are they getting to the entrance of their, because we have, I think along Stafford in one of the plans, it was multifamily.
So you'd have essentially the wall, small courtyard, the building, and then the parking. And like demonstration plans and kind of mock-ups I've seen, the parking would be, especially south of Brisbane, would be between, essentially, if that were to develop as multifamily down there, you'd have the parking lot between the wetland and stormwater feature and the buildings along Stafford, which would be accessed, in that case, probably by a private drive, but a developer could opt to like, probably put,
So you'd be parking behind your abode, walking around a building to get to the front entrance?
So it doesn't have to be a front entrance facing Stafford, so we were specific on that. So an example of, I think a good example, I mean, there's a number of multifamilies where there is a breezeway that goes all the way through, where you can kind of come in from either side. So that may be, but exactly how they work that out, there's design options, but it may be that you have an entrance from the parking lot. Yeah, essentially would probably have to, in that case, put an entrance on both sides.
Okay. And then along Advance, so along Beckman, which is literally the same road, right? On west, you've got backyard treatment along Beckman, and we're going to change that to front yard treatment on Advance.
And also something to keep in mind, and something we've written into the code, is so there is a transition there, because assuming that kind of that Stafford Advance intersection develops the same, that actually the treatment of Stafford would wrap around to that wetland, which is, I think, about 250 feet to the east of Stafford. And then past that wetland, you would transition to more of this front-facing home with the courtyards.
Okay. All right. Got it.
Commissioner Mez was thinking something.
Commissioner Gallagher? So I'll ask a clarifying question. So in line with Commissioner Carr's questioning around Stafford, so multifamily would need access points from Stafford into the residences, but not necessarily front doors to the residences. Is that correct?
Correct.
So a patio door would be acceptable for a pedestrian entrance?
Conceptually, I mean, we didn't say no in the current draft. That kind of in my mind, if it was multifamily, you'd essentially, if it was multifamily, you'd probably end up with a design with a breezeway.
Okay.
You could enter from either side and then go up the stairs to the different units. In a like a detached home or townhouse configuration, you'd probably have an alley-loaded home with the entrance on Stafford.
Okay. But then there's no parking on Stafford.
There would not be parking on Stafford, correct?
Okay. So
Behind the building to get your groceries, right?
I was thinking more on the guest side. And so on the homeowner side, you would be able to park at the garage or in the garage theoretically. But then anybody who was visiting would have to park elsewhere and then walk around to the front. Okay.
Or through the breezeway. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you have a front parking lot and a pedestrian orientation at the same time. It's, there's trade-offs.
You aren't going to have front parking lots off of Stafford. That's too many driveways.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is the only kind of point of conversation we had at the time was to make sure these houses aren't turning their back on Stafford. So it's a design issue. It's not where the front door is. It has to do with how you articulate the back of the house so it doesn't look like the back of the house. It could be a patio door, but, depending on how you do the back patio, it could look like a front porch.
You have to give it design elements that are not flat.
Right. And you can't park there or drive there anyway. You have to go back. So, I mean, that doesn't make any difference how you design the house.
Okay. Do you know Mimi Dukas with AKS is here tonight, who I know is probably back there listening to me try to describe these site plans that she's looked at a lot, and so I know she has some thoughts about this, so if it pleases the commission, I'm sure she'd love to share some comments this evening as well.
Yep, that'd be great.
It pleases the commission.
Yes. And Mr. Pauly, for the record, I didn't see a whole lot of negative facial expressions as you were presenting, so you should be okay. Ms. Dukas, yes, would you like to come forward and state your name and address for the record, or state that it is provided on the comment card?
Good evening, Commissioners. By now you know me. I'm Mimi Dukas. I'm with AKS Engineering here on behalf of West Hills. And we continue to follow your development code efforts. I don't have a ton of comments tonight. You'll be relieved to know. We have a couple, though. On page 556, the code language probably just needs a little bit of cleanup. Because it appears like there's conflict. There is language at the top of the page. The headings are a bit confusing. It's lowercase b, and it says the garage door must be recessed at least 4 feet from the front facade or 6 feet from the front of a front porch, which is fine. But if you scroll down to lowercase f, it says the garage entry that faces a street may be no closer to the street than the longest street-facing wall of the dwelling unit. There must be at least 20 feet between the garage door and the sidewalk. Those two sections seem to conflict with each other. I think we get their general intent, but I think a little bit of wordsmithing is needed in there. I didn't actually propose wordsmithing, but I think anything that provides a little clarity there would help. And then scrolling back up where I referred to the lowercase b, just below that lowercase c says the maximum driveway width is 18 feet. 18 feet is very narrow, and so people getting out of their car are going to be stepping onto the landscaping. So we would recommend that you widen that to 20 feet so that guests and visitors and residents, when they get out of their vehicle, can actually step on pavement, which is a more stable surface. It's better for accessibility and visibility. So that little bit of extra width really makes the driveway function better. And then finally, I think this is just a point of clarification. The very last page, the image that was showing, page 564, we just want to make sure that that image on 564 is the one intended, and it's not intended to be all wrought iron. Along Advance Road or Beckman, we think that combination of masonry plus the wrought iron gives a good balance of transparency plus permanency. That little bit of masonry just gives you a little bit of separation from the public realm, but you still get the visibility through the wrought iron. If it's just wrought iron, it feels a little too accessible. So I think that was the intent, particularly with the slide. But the way that it's got the gate image up above it on 563, it was a little bit confusing. In regards to the commissioner questions about the multifamily dwellings along Stafford for the West Hills property, which is north of Advance Road and east of Stafford, the plan is to have garden apartments along that stretch. And as I believe Mr. Pauly said, those typically have a set of units, a stairwell, a set of units, stairwell, set of units. So you get that breezeway effect. So that allows for the entries to come through, allows the parking to be over on the east side of the building, and you've got that urban frontage along Stafford Road. So things change. That's our current design. We think it works quite well, but we think we can work with the standard as it's written. But just a little clarity in case you had questions. That's all I had tonight, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
I appreciate the clarity on
Sure.
the building, the look and feel of that building. Yeah, thank you.
A follow-up on your 20-foot wide versus 18. I thought I heard from Mr. Pauly that the idea is that it's 18 near the street, and then you can widen as you get closer to the...
Oh, okay. I didn't
We've worked a lot.
I didn't realize
that
that.
AKS have worked a lot on that in West, so I don't know if there's any feedback on that.
The garage, it can be wider than 18.
Okay.
The street frontage is 18.
Okay.
But I would say I'm not sure that the code is written as that. I mean, it says maximum driveway width is 18 feet. It doesn't say maximum driveway width is 18 feet at the sidewalk, for example. So if that's the intent, then I would say that we should update that to clarify.
Also, Dan, was there an intent of that width being 18, a certain number of feet away from the sidewalk as well?
I know our engineering team has some thoughts on this, so I'll have to clarify.
I'm assuming you're not 18 at sidewalk and 6 inches past the sidewalk, then it bumps out to 24. I mean, that defeats your purpose of trying to make sure that people who are using the sidewalk...
I think at the sidewalk is the most critical point.
At the sidewalk.
But you see what I'm saying? It depends on what defines that sidewalk width. If it's a masonry wall is different than if it's grass.
Right, where you can't drive, you don't want a drivable surface.
You're toast if you're a pedestrian, because if it's 24 farther up, somebody could easily just drive through.
Yeah.
Yeah, is it at the curb or at the
Right.
inside of the sidewalk?
And how far inside, beyond the sidewalk.
I know our engineering team has a lot of experience with this, so I'll work with them to get that language crisp.
But the point is well taken that, when you drive up your car close to the garage and want to get out, you ought to be able to get out on pavement instead of grass or mud or whatever you choose.
Sometimes I park parallel in my driveway just because I can.
That's because you don't have to store the chairs boat yet. When that happens, then you don't have that with.
And just for the record, it would be an airplane, not a boat.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's that. Thank you, Ms. Dukas. Appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else on that?
No. Thank you, Mr. Polly.
Ask that from you.
Well, I'll have more later, trust me.
Yeah, I look forward to the next episode of Mr. Polly's Neighborhood. Okay, informational items, city council action minutes, PC work program. I looked at neither of them. Anything of note anybody wants to talk about?
I saw we renamed Columbine Street to something else.
Ponderosa app.
Yeah, I like that. And are we doing anything with the publicizing the camping code? There has been a lot of discussion in my neighborhood, because we have a park right by us, that we're going to start seeing tents in our park.
Parks are excluded, for the record. No camping is allowed in parks.
I keep saying that, but the question keeps getting asked. So is there?
On Let's Talk Wilsonville, there is a project page dedicated to prohibited camping that has all the information there.
I will point them there.
That would be the best place.
Okay.
I'm assuming that's going to go in the spokesman and other.
It has been, but yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's where the questions start coming from.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's also been in the Boones Ferry Messenger.
Are you getting the same questions from the same people, or?
No, I'm getting it from all my neighbors, and I keep saying the same thing. Our park is not going to have a bunch of tents in it because parks are excluded. And I've had that conversation like 7 times so
Are
far.
the same people?
No, different neighbors.
Okay, well, that's at least reassuring.
So now I know where to send them, yeah.
Okay.
We will be preparing informational materials that will be available at all of our city buildings as well.
Thank you.
Essentially, there's this information out there, that's the problem.
Well, stuff written in the spokesman sometimes needs clarification and proper English applied to it. And if that's where we're getting our information, yes.
I guess what I was saying is that the city has gone for the past 4 or 5, 6 months out of their way to inform through all of their media.
Sure. But then they read the spokesman and they form their own opinions.
Yeah.
And they ask me about it.
Okay.
A lot of them have already formed their opinion, and nothing you say is going to change their mind.
Well, yeah. They just think I know everything, and it's like, I don't.
Now you do.
Now I know where to send them.
Yes, and as the project manager, I'm happy to talk with anybody who has any questions, so you can also refer them to me.
I will send them to the website.
Send them there first.
Yes, I will send them to the website first. Yes, thank you.
The question you were asking, though, was, are we going to have a public kind of open house on that, or? I don't know if,
well,
it already got passed, right? I mean, this is now a law for the city.
Yeah, it goes into effect July 1, but council already voted on first reading on May 1 unanimously for it. It goes for a second reading on May 15th.
Now, ours is more specific than the state, because that's where I'm also, is that a correct statement?
No, I mean, the state says we have to have regulations, but it just says you have to have
Regulations.
regulations. It doesn't get much, I mean, there are some specifics that we have to do, but as far as the time, place, and manner regulations, which is what we're talking about, it just says they have to be objectively reasonable, which is very informative.
Yeah, that's very useful in language, in legal language.
Yeah.
Amanda, on the other hand, what Commissioner Carr was asking is, ours is not the same as what the state would have had we not adopted.
Or the city of Portland.
Adopted our own.
Yeah.
Right.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, this could have been
'Cause we're-
far worse for all of the people who are troubled by the possibility.
The possibilities, yes.
And I mean, not to editorialize too much, but I do feel like council was really intentional in wanting it to be where we can get our arms around any potential issues and get people the help that they need. And so in being intentional in that way, they wanted, what you see a lot of other jurisdictions doing is say, you just can't go here. They don't say where you can go, and that creates enforcement and education issues. And so council kind of went away from that model that we've seen other cities moving towards and saying, no, we want to say, here's where you go, because then we can make sure that we're getting you connected to services.
Services and
Which is the
proximity.
ultimate goal. This is not the goal. The ultimate goal is getting people services they need.
I appreciate that.
That's great context. Thank you. Given that, looks like we need a motion to adjourn.
You go ahead.
I move to adjourn.
Second,
All right,
third, fourth.
given that, we are adjourned, 7:26 PM. Thank you.
Well done.